Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a special online event today called 7 Keys to Optimize Your Gene Expression for Vibrant Health and Longevity. My name is Stephen Dinan, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and I'm thrilled to be with you here today because I love learning from new people, and we have a brilliant teacher here today. His name is Dr. Kenneth Pelletier, and he is the author of the international bestseller, Mind is Healer, Mind is Slayer, and Change Your Genes and Change Your Life. Those are two different books. He's an integrative medicine pioneer, was taught at Stanford, where we have a connection point, and he's really doing some of the most groundbreaking work around epigenetics. So we're in a month where we're exploring a lot more about the connections between science and spirituality and the frontiers of consciousness. And Ken, as I'll call him, is really one of the pioneers in this world. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
So, Ken, let's start off with a little bit of your personal backstory. So you're into this frontiers of science and epigenetics, and really what put you on this path to be exploring these areas.
Well, my original research in the mid-'70s at UCSF School of Medicine really had to address the question of mind-body interaction. And in the mid-'70s, the medical textbooks told us there was a voluntary nervous system and an involuntary nervous system, and never the two shall meet. And I knew that wasn't true because if you think about it, you can hold your breath, which is voluntary, but at some point your oxygen level drops and you have to inhale, and that's involuntary. So same with, you can hold your eyes open for a period of time, the eye dries, and then you have to blink, and that's involuntary. So there was this interface between them. So in the mid-'70s, I studied a series of what we ended up calling adept meditators. These are people who could do things like skewer themselves with sharpened bicycle spokes through their arms and their face and not bleed and not experience pain. And in fact, during their meditations, they looked as though they were on a beach having a wonderful vacation. So now, and that was very clear that the mind could have a profound influence over or in interaction with the body. So fast forward to the present time, the last 7 or 8 years, I've been focused on epigenetics, or the fact that not only do we have a direct impact on our body, on our organs, on our nervous system, we have a direct impact on our genes, that we actually can influence genetic expression. So it's really taken the lessons that we learned that became the book, Mind is Healer, Mind is Slayer, and fast forward them to the present time down to a cellular look at the fact that we do influence our health. We do influence our longevity.
Yeah, we've gotten fairly, I think, used to, in at least new paradigm circles, thinking, oh, of course we influence our body, but actually it's a big paradigm shift that for medical science, because we was just sort of like, you got the genes you got, and that's it, and we'll work with it. And this revolution of really saying it's like, oh, there's an active feedback loop. It has profound implications for almost every area of medicine.
It does. And I think the greatest misconception for general public and for medical science is that the gene is like a hard drive on your computer, a set of invariant laws and that govern how your computer works. And in fact, that's not the case. The gene is more like an AI, an interactive software that we are literally influencing our genetic expression, whether it's amplified or decreased, second by second, minute by minute, day by day. So I think that's what's astounding, that it's such a delicate mechanism, and only 5% of what we see as adult health or disease is determined by what they call monogenic genes, or fully penetrant genes, meaning if you've got it, you'll show up with that illness. Only 5% of our life expectancy and health is due to that. The other 95% is due to what we influence through diet and exercise and meditation, et cetera. So it's really a profound shift from passive biological reductionistic determinism to something that's interactive, self-care, and very much under our own influence.
Yeah, one of the words that I notice you use, which is a good, careful scientific word, is influence. Sometimes in our spheres, people can get really causative, like, "Oh, our thoughts do everything," but no, the genes have a big impact. But there's this kind of intermixing of what we're doing with our conscious self and what are happening and sort of bottom up on the genetic level. And I'd love you to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's actually a very important insight and distinction. In one of my articles in a medical journal, I said it's not mind over matter, it's that mind matters. And that's what you're talking about, which is the interaction between our consciousness and our physiology. So sometimes a disease is so advanced that no matter what we do mentally or other ways, it's not going to make, honestly, any difference. But up until that point, up until the point where it's terminal or it's so extreme that we can't influence, we can have a profound impact. So genes do not change. My book title is a bit of a gotcha title. Genes don't actually change except if they're damaged by radiation, petrochemical exposure, or herbicides like Roundup is a notoriously nasty gene disruptor. So it does not change. What does change is what we call expression. So whether a gene is going to become manifest or not then depends on everything we do in our life. So it is this ongoing interaction, and the longest period of time it takes to make a change and have your gene express itself or suppress itself is 12 weeks. Most often this happens in seconds, minutes, or days. So this is an ongoing process, an ongoing interaction between our biology and our psyche.
Now, so I imagine there's some of this just happening all the time subconsciously, whether, we're influencing, but then there's another level where we're consciously taking on practices and getting better at this and doing it in a better way. So I'd love you to share, what are some of the things that enhance our ability to affect our genes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The most impact on our genes really comes from diet. And we know that diet has a major impact on gene expression. Whether a gene becomes manifest or not is greatly influenced by diet. It's also greatly influenced by stress and how well we manage stress or how we succumb to the negative impact of events in our lives. The environment has a huge influence. If we're exposed to petrochemicals and herbicides and other kinds of environmental toxins, that also has a very negative impact on our genes. The other is that, to me, what's even more fascinating is that our psychosocial interactions. We did a program for the state of California a number of years ago called Friends Can Be Good Medicine. And it's quite literally the case that our interactions with our friends, our family, people in our lives that are significant has a huge impact on our state of health or illness. There's a famous study done almost 40 years ago, which found that people that do not have social support have 10 times as many heart disease events, heart attacks, as people who do. So this again is how the outside world effect becomes part of our deeply inside world at the level of the DNA in our cells.
So let's circle back. You mentioned these kind of advanced yogis who can, put things in their body without any sign of pain. So what are some of those capacities that we start to be able to downregulate our body more actively or consciously than most people even think possible?
Well, certainly one of the things we learned from the studies with our adept yogis is that pain is a very controllable response. And you know that we're in a crisis now in the United States, really globally, the opioid crisis. We've used opioids excessively to cope with pain. They don't work. They're short run. They produce addiction. They produce side effects that are very undesirable. And we're finally recognizing that. So what we learned from the yogis is that meditation is a way to drastically reduce the sensation of pain. For instance, one of the yogis said to us that when he pushed a bicycle spoke through his bicep, and by the way, this is a do not do this at home admonition. he said, when I asked him what it was like, he said it was like pressing his finger on his arm. He said, I'm aware of the sensation, but it's no longer painful. And when we looked at his EEG, it was calm and quiet. His heart rate was normal and regular. Blood pressure was low. So it did look like he was on a beach. Now, he did respond to pain normally when he wasn't meditating. So we knew it wasn't an abnormal response. But pain is a huge area where people can make a difference. The other big area is heart disease. We know that stress, diet has a huge impact on heart disease. So that's another area where we're seeing this mind-body interaction having a profound impact. And then we can extend that into other things like predisposition to diabetes. We hear about diabetes becoming a national epidemic, and it is. And that is an entirely preventable condition. If we detect it early enough and have specific recommendations on what we can do, diabetes becomes a totally preventable condition. Alzheimer's disease. So everything when I really think retrospectively, everything we call major chronic disease, which is maybe 90% of all disease we see as adults, is entirely influenceable by the factors that we've just been discussing.
Fascinating. You mentioned stress as a really big causative factor. I'd love for you to share a little bit about the different ways in which stress can have an impact on our genes and ultimately our health.
Right. Yes, stress is the most pervasive influence, maybe even more so than diet, in the sense that we're eating 2 or 3 times a day, but stress is constant. I mean, this is a bit of a digression, but there are really 2 kinds of stress. One is short term, when the source of stress is immediate, identifiable, and resolvable. And that's physical threat. You step off the sidewalk, a car honks at you, you jump back, and you live. It feels uncomfortable, but there's nothing wrong with that stress. We're adapted to that kind of stress, and it makes a huge difference. The second type, which are called type 2 stress, and this came out of my book, Mind is Healer, back in the mid-'70s, is when the source of stress is not immediate, not identifiable, and not resolvable. So if you think about it, most of our issues are not physical threats to our life, but a concern about a conflict with a colleague, a financial pressure, an IRS return, whatever it happens to be, commuting in traffic. When we perceive something to be life-threatening, our biology responds exactly the same way. So blood pressure goes up, heart rate increases, all the catecholamines and biochemical changes take place in the body, and it results in what we call the fight or flight response, or are prepared to engage in combat or engaged to run. And the key to stress management is breaking up the type 2 cumulative stress response into type 1 intervals that we can manage. And any number of forms of meditation practice, yoga, Pilates, Zazen, transcendental meditation, any of these practices can break up the type 2 into a type 1 stress response and make it manageable. And then when we have a manageable stress, we're talking about optimal performance. Enough stress to be focused and acute and sharp, and not enough to be counterproductive, producing illness and disability.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, it's really clear that we didn't evolve our bodies in a modern context, and so we have a limited repertoire of responses to challenging circumstances. So it's important to be able to kind of bring in these other practices. Which leads me to, we're going to get to the 7 keys or the 7 pathways soon, but I'd love for you, we want this to be experiential. So let's take a little, do a little practice now with, you said there's a simple spiritual practice you can do to positively influence your gene expression, which is really quite provocative. So I'd love for you to guide us in a little practice, or at least tell us how to do it.
Yes, and this comes out of a study that was actually published 6 months ago out of Harvard. And they took a group of individuals who were meditators, and they asked them to meditate for 15 minutes. And they looked at their genetic expression before and after one 15-minute meditation interval. And what they found is that all their genetic biomarkers were improved. Inflammation was reduced, lipid metabolism was better, immunity was enhanced. So this is in 15 minutes. And so here's probably the most simple possible exercise, which is if you just close your eyes, you're actually going to do this with your eyes open, and just take an in-breath for a count of 4. So you breathe in slowly, deeply into the bottom part of your lungs for a count of 4. Hold it for a count of 2. And then exhale for a count of 4. So it's inhale for 4, hold it for a count of 2, and then slowly exhale for a count of 4. Inhale for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 2, exhale for a count of 4. And I think if you even pay attention to this brief time, what you realize is you feel different. You feel more centered, more relaxed. And also what you've done is you've just changed the electrical activity in your brain. It's gone from high fast frequency to very low intensity alpha rhythm, and your whole brain has become more synchronous. So just simple respiration. It's basically a zazen or a Zen tradition of this kind of breathing cycle. The other, experientially, to make this easy, to make this, I think many meditation techniques and visualization, or the use of visual imagery, is made much too esoteric, and in fact it's not. It's very practical. So as an instance right now, either close your eyes or with your eyes open, tell me the number of windows in your living room. Just tell me the number of windows in your living room. And the question is, how did you do that? Most people say they saw their living room and counted the windows, right? That's the most common response. Well, that is as vivid as visualization has to be in order to work. You know, I think we get in our own way. We think it has to be in 3D, quadraphonic sound, 3 dimensions, but it really isn't. It's as simple as seeing the number of windows in your living room and counting them. Your visualization doesn't have to be any more explicit, any more detailed, any more powerful than that to have a pronounced effect. So if you do your basically simple zazen deep breathing, follow that by a visualization, you have 2 actually very deceptively simple but powerful tools to mastering this mind-body interaction that we've been talking about.
Well, I imagine the visualization of the windows in your living room may be less effective for your health than something else. Do you have particular recommendations for the kinds of visualizations that are most helpful?
Well, usually the advanced, if you will, visualizations are usually when they're outside in nature. One, because nature is inherently healing, and now we have a whole line of literature looking at what they call nature bathing, which is being out in nature. And that would involve then more sensory cues. So you would smell the earth, you would hear the sound of water moving or wind blowing in the trees, you would feel the ground under your hands or under your seat as being grainy or grass or a rocky enclave. So you try to have the image become more tactile, more real in all its dimensions. And then there really is a somewhat more complex, but a 4-stage visualization where you have the exterior, you visualize an issue that you want to make a difference with, you witness the transformation of that image, and then you return to the place where you began. And what you will notice is that some things have changed in that 4th stage. So this is a 4-stage relaxation and visualization. And that actually is quite profound in terms of its healing impact. It goes beyond the simple breathing relaxation and beyond a simple visualization into something that begins to have a direct impact. So this could be an impact on an illness issue, heart disease, arthritis, whatever, or it can be to improve a performance, a golf swing, a tennis stroke, downhill skiing, or whatever, or intellectually, doing better in an exam. So this can have a positive orientation as well, and it really works. I mean, there's a lot of research literature that this simple 4-stage visualization, all these things are deceptively simple because hearing about it is not the trick. The trick is doing it. And it's the doing that is most difficult for us.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, it's great to have the access to all this research through you. I mean, you've clearly really studied this field in depth. Well, we call today 7 keys to optimize your gene expression for vibrant health and longevity. So let's talk about the 7 pathways in the body that can really be the most powerful for determining whether we get health or illness and how we can affect them.
Yes, and this could literally take us days, but it's kind of, this is basic biochemistry. So it's kind of biochemistry 101, that we have 7 pathways in the body, and all of these pathways are governed by our genes. So the pathways include methylation, and methylation is like punctuation. So the genetic code are letters, and then the methylation are the periods and the exclamation points and the question marks. So it's where a sentence begins and ends to give direction to the body. Second one is inflammation, and so we have, if we have hyperinflammation, we have heart disease, cancer, arthritic disorders. If we have less inflammation, we're susceptible to colds and flus and every conceivable kind of infection. The third then is lipid metabolism. How well do we digest fats? Some people, quite honestly, can eat a high-fat diet and never have a problem. And that's part of what we'll see later in the course, is why that's the case and how you can know whether you're one of those people or not. Then the next is mineral metabolism. So it's all the trace elements that occur in the body, copper, zinc, the basically ingestion, utilization of trace elements in foods that are not fiber, not fat, not the major food issues, but how does that affect our health, and where do we get that from? Then yet another is detoxification. And we hear about that, and it sounds like a mysterious phenomenon, but it really is not. We are constantly detoxifying through sweating through our skin. Our liver is constantly detoxifying our foods, our supplements, our vitamins, our minerals, our environmental toxins. And there are ways to accelerate that. There are foods, there are meditation practices, there's physical activity that in fact can assist and elevate the detoxification process. So I think those are the complete list. I may have missed one in that list, but these are all governed by our genes. So we can turn up or turn down inflammation. There are times when you want to turn it up. There are times when you want to turn it down. And the whole objective to what we're talking about is to stay within an optimal range, both for health and longevity. And to me, that's what's most important.
Cool. Well, circle back to the sort of the conversation about food plans and diets. You said that was one of the most important things. So, and what I understand is that it's individual. It's not just like there's one size fits all. So I'd love to share a little bit about like why there's a lot of individual variation in what kinds of diets are going to help optimize our gene expression too.
Right. I'm glad you asked that. Like you, when I go to conferences, I hear about high-fat, low-fat diet, ketogenic diet, paleo diet. The latest one I get exposed to now is the celery juice fast diet. And my opinion is that they're all nonsense. There was a great study about 6 months ago in Journal of the American Medical Association. They took 10 diets and they followed them for 6 months, and they wanted to see, did in fact these weight loss diets work? At 6 months, all of the diets worked. On the diets, everyone lost weight. I don't think it had anything to do with the weight. It had to do with people paying attention to their diet. Then they followed it out for 1 year, and they wanted to see how many people sustained the weight loss that was evident at 6 months at 1 year. Only one diet had demonstrable sustained weight loss, and it was Weight Watchers. Now, Weight Watchers is not a great diet nutritionally, but they have social support. They have meals that are prepared. They have very, very strong support systems built in so people adhere to the diet long term. So that becomes then the critical variable, is when you make changes in your diet, they have to be something you can sustain for life. And the last thing that I'll add to this is that most of us, we have no idea who we are. biochemically. We have no idea what our metabolism is like. We have no idea what our absorption of lipids is or is not. Can we eat lots of fat and not have a problem? Possibly. We don't know. There are now assays that can tell us unequivocally what kinds of foods, what kinds of exercise, what kinds of meditation is most effective for us. So my response or answer to what is the best diet is there's a best diet that is for you, for your biochemistry, for your unique profile. And we can figure out what that is. There are ways, there are assays now that exist that can help you determine, right down to a fine-grained detail, like eat walnuts and not almonds, because almonds are not metabolically good for you. You can't absorb them, you can't digest them, whereas walnuts are really good. So it gets down to a fine-grained detail, but it cuts through what I consider total nonsense, which are dietary guidelines, whether it's a ketogenic diet or a paleo diet or American Heart Association diet, it doesn't matter. Those are all ill-fitting guidelines that really don't tell you anything about what you really need in your diet. And that's what the whole field of epigenesis is about, is what is your unique individual profile.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that, people who like somebody whose profile fits the ketogenic kind of diet, they may do it and then they feel great. But then they think it's great for everybody is sort of what you're saying, when it might only be 10% of people that works for.
Correct. And probably 10% is about the right estimate. I mean, ketogenic is a major dietary fat, and it is a dietary fat. It's been around for 50 years. And it's an effective diet for epilepsy. So when epileptic drugs failed, you put someone on a ketogenic diet, and in fact, it does have a very benign effect. I think the rage now is due to the fact that it's a quick weight loss diet. You will unequivocally lose weight on a ketogenic diet. It's geared to weight loss. The problem is, and I've seen this with patients when they come through our cardiology prevention clinic, that at 6 months, that person's biomarkers, so all of the measures of heart disease, lipid elevations, lipid subfractions, et cetera, the person is headed to a heart attack. I mean, it's a very negative diet in the long run. So for 3 to 6 months, if a person wanted to lose weight or had to lose weight or had an epileptic issue or wanted to try it for something like Parkinson's or other kinds of neurological disorders, there's probably nothing wrong with it. But after about 6 months, you got to get off it. It's a deadly diet. And so I'm not an advocate of ketogenic diets. I think, as you can tell, I think there's a lot of problems.
I thought it was interesting that what you said about the Weight Watchers diet and the social support was actually in some ways more important than the quality of the nutrition. I thought that was a fascinating insight. It kind of reminded me of how Dr. Ornish, when he did all of his heart research, how important that piece was, and it tended to get neglected by people reporting. They would just focus on other aspects, and that social support was actually one of the most significant.
It is, and I think we're finding that now more than ever is our relationship to friends and family and the positive emotions that are generated from that. Again, that's assuming it's a happy relationship. When it's negative, it can be equally destructive. I mean, a marriage that stays together in conflict can be very destructive, very stressful, and it has a negative impact on your health and well-being. On the other hand, if you have a good relationship with a partner, male, female, children, parents, that has a very positive impact in the sense of it shifts your body chemistries. You go into a more, basically a more anabolic state, or a regenerative biochemical state occurs when you are happy, when you have a good connection to other people. And that's very, very positive on your health. When you have a negative environment, negative interaction with people, it produces a catabolic or a destructive energy mobilization. Oh my God, I'm in fear, and therefore I need to mobilize my energy. That has a very destructive effect on the body. But we now see, again, going back for 40 years now, an increasing amount of research that friends can be good medicine, I think, is a good way to think about it. And it is literally true psychologically and biologically. We're now finding it's equally true.
That's fascinating. So you kind of think the doctors of the future will ask you just as many questions about the quality of your relationships as what's going on just on the bodily level.
Well, hopefully they will. I mean, there are some interesting studies. For instance, there was a study out of the University of Montreal, and this was done about 5 years ago, and they wanted to know what would predict the likelihood of someone age 65 living to be healthy at age 70. And so they did every conceivable medical test and profile on these individuals, and they then retested them. They tested them at 65 and retested them at age 70. And it turns out that none of the medical assays predicted at all who was going to be alive and healthy at age 70. There was one throwaway question in the questionnaire, and it said, "Are you pessimistic or optimistic about being healthy and well at age 70?" If a person answered yes, they were alive and well at age 70. If a person answered no, the vast majority of them had died or succumbed to a major premorbid condition.
Wow.
So again, you're right. That's an astounding kind of finding. So the simple expectation, anticipation, will to live has a powerful influence over our biology, our future, even our longevity. There's some great research in the epigenetics area that we, in fact, do influence our actual life expectancy, which is something we always think of as residing in our genes. Well, it doesn't. It also resides in our behavior and our lifestyle.
Take us now. You've kind of covered this in different pieces, but I'd take us through that like the causal links there. So if you have the mindset you're going to have a positive expectation you're going to be healthy at 70, how does that actually cascade through and affect your genes so that it actually comes into fruition?
Right. Okay, so let me start at the other end, at the genetic level. How does a gene express itself and what influences that? Well, the gene itself is coated in a molecular sheath. It's like a glove over a hand, and the sheath is called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. So that's a mouthful, like in all things in genetics. But the SNPs are rheostats, and they coat the gene, and the gene is then immersed in the chemistry of the cell. So what happens when the cell chemistry changes, if it changes to be a catabolic function or stress response, it changes the expression of that gene, let's say for inflammation. When it's positive, it'll turn it down. And so that cell is then embedded in the body. The body makes up our organs, and we are then connected to the world around us. So if you have a positive relationship with an individual, that will translate into positive biochemical changes. The neurology of your brain changes. If you're in a happy circumstance, problem solving, an aha moment, a loving moment, a sexual moment, your brain becomes synchronous. Left and right hemispheres are in synchrony. The front and back of the brain are in synchrony. All of your stress hormones are low. Your heart rate is low. Your blood pressure is lower. Inflammation is normalized. So in other words, a happy response to a person or to your environment translates into a whole chain of happy chemical changes in your body. That trickles back down to the cell. The cell interacts with the SNPs interact with the genetic expression. So there's a very clear kind of causal pathway. And that's one that, in theory, the bits and pieces, as you point out, have been known for quite a few years. But now what's different is we actually have assays and biochemical tests that show each step of that pathway. And we get able to fill in the blanks. And more importantly, we know that we can do something about each of those steps. So we're not a passive victim of stress, and we're not even a passive victim of too much happiness, although I'm not sure that's a problem. But there is a clear causal pathway between what happens in our external psychosocial and physical environment all the way down to the genetic level and genetic expression.
As you're speaking, it reminds me that John Robbins, who I really respect a lot, did a book called Healthy at 100, and the cultures where the expectation was that they looked forward to being older because they had higher status and they were really celebrated, and like they were kind of running around on mountains at 100 years old in some of these places. And often they would exaggerate their age a little higher.
Yes. Yeah, I'm familiar with that and the Blue Zones book. Yeah. And actually, a number of years ago, I wrote a book called Longevity, Fulfilling Our biological potential, and actually went and visited some of those places before it became really popular. But Alexander Leaf, who was at Harvard, did one of his very early studies for National Geographic and went to these blue zones. This would have been 40, almost 50 years ago now. And you're right. What he found is that many of the things we're talking about, they had lacto-vegetarian diets. They didn't eat beef. They ate fish if they ate protein, whole protein at all. They had, they had physical activity, not going to a gym. They were farmers. They had to bend and twist and walk and move. But most importantly, they did have a veneration for old age. Old age was seen to be a positive state. It's not like at age 65 you're put on a waste bin. It was venerable. You were honored. You had a great decision-making authority in the family. So it was a positive aspect to their advanced age. The other is that they did not have a fear of death, which I thought was fascinating. They were living into their 90s and their hundreds, and so death is fairly imminent, but they never dwelled on death. They didn't think about it. They were more focused on a life well and fully lived. And when they did die, which was obviously inevitable, they'd die within 2 or 3 days. So the long lingering disability that we face here in our culture in modern times was not present. So that was what they were concerned about, becoming a burden to their family or disability. And what you found is that they would literally say, I'm not going to be here tomorrow morning, or I'm not going to be here in a few days. They would know when they were going to die. And so they had a very optimistic attitude. But all of the factors that we are talking about that we can kind of create in our own life is exemplified in the blue zones, in these long-lived cultures. And I think when we look at the future, when we shift into a more healthcare system, which we do not have right now, that we will find more extended life expectancy, and it'll be due to many of the factors we're talking about.
So it's a question, how long are you planning to live, and what are you doing to visualize your health at that age?
100 sounds good. And maybe
I've been doing the same thing. I've been programming myself for 100. Positive health until 100.
I think right now that is an entirely reasonable age for virtually anyone who's watching this or listening to this to achieve 100 plus. There's a famous study done almost 50 years ago now by a biologist, Leonard Hayflick, and he said, how long would a cell last? How long would it live under optimal circumstances? And he put it in a petri dish under optimal circumstances and saw how many times would it divide accurately until it finally died. And it turned out the equivalent in human life expectancy of the number of times that cell would divide was about 100 to 125 years. Now, that's kind of remarkable because the oldest person that we know clearly has documented for life expectancy was Jean Calumet, who died at 123 in Paris. So it's in the range of life expectancy that you can see, and it's called the Hayflick limit. And there are even now some research going on that challenge the fact that this may not be, in fact, an upper limit, and human life expectancy might be 150 or 160. That's highly speculative, but the reality of living to roughly 115 to 120 is not at all inconceivable now, and I'm aiming for that.
That's great. Well, let's switch gears. And you've mentioned a few times that you can do much more granular analysis of our own genetic profile and therefore optimize many of the choices we make. So let's talk about home DNA tests and epigenetics and epigenetic profile now.
Well, it's a complicated area. I think all of us are aware of the fact that at least every day, many times a week, I will get emails or mailers that tell me about some new epigenetic profile. So it's the profile of the day club. And then, of course, you have 23andMe. And 23andMe has done a service in the sense of it's raised our awareness of genetic profiles. But I really object to that particular model because it is a disease prediction model. It says you've got a 40% likelihood of some dreaded disease, and then that's it. It doesn't tell you what you can do about it. It doesn't tell you what the other people who have the same genetic profile and yet don't get the disease, the other 60%, what are they like and what do they do to prevent that disease from being manifest? So there's the disease prediction model. That's not at all what I'm talking about. What we're talking about in our research, and we do multiple levels of analysis, is healthy biomarkers. And so somebody says, well, what's a biomarker? Your cholesterol number is a biomarker. So it's a number that's attached to a biological variable, and it has a range, high versus low, and you need to be in that optimal range. And every biological function in our body has a number attached to it. And there are assays now that can tell us what those numbers are like. There are about, and you want to optimize that. You want to be within an optimal range that will ensure health and will also ensure life expectancy. So another marker is a telomere, which is a marker of aging. And again, we can influence the telomeres. There's a couple of excellent studies out of UCSF Med with Elizabeth Blackburn. She won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the telomere, that these basically programs that consist of diet and meditation, physical activity, and social support actually elongate the telomeres. Now, there are about maybe 5 to 7 companies that produce commercial versions of this, and I don't include 23andMe in that group, that will give you an accurate assay based on blood or genetic, a cheek swab, and or a microbiome swab, or basically a stool sample, that will give a very clear indication of your particular genetic profile. And those are available now. They work. They're accurate and provide tremendous amount of information. So it's a step toward what I hope to see in the future, which is personalized healthcare. When we take general guidelines and really say, what's that got to do with me, and how can I take advantage of this? So they exist, and they're getting better.
Great. So. So once you get a good assay and get a profile, then how do you then use that to make better choices?
Right. Well, the ideal profile is one that has 3 components. One would be the genetic profile, and the analogy would be like the blueprint of a house. So it's the ideal information. Secondly would be blood, and that's like building the house. And when you go from a blueprint to building a house, it always changes. A window doesn't quite fit where it should be, and it needs to be modified. And the third is then the microbiome, or the intestinal tract. It's all of the bacteria that are inside and outside of our bodies. And by the way, there are tens of trillions in the cells and organisms in our microbiome. There are only 23 to 25,000 genes. So the microbiome far outweighs anything that's in our genetic code, and yet has a profound impact on our mental state, our health, our longevity, et cetera. So if you have those 3, you have the gene, you have the blood, and you have the microbiome, then you've got a complete assay. When you get the printout back and you get the information from that, the next step is then you need to work with a genetic counselor, or someone that can help you adapt the general information to another level of specificity. So you might find that certain foods, give you an example, if I ask you now, what will spike your blood sugar, which is a good measure of optimal response, what will produce a glycemic spike, a banana or an Oreo cookie? Now, 90% of people will say the Oreo cookie. Turns out that's not the case. About 20 to 30% of people will spike more with a banana than with an Oreo cookie. Now, you have no way of knowing that, right? It's a surprise. It was a surprise to me. So you have no way of knowing that, but that continual spike and trough based on foods that have this impact on you ultimately affects your health and well-being. And you can find that out through these assays. And again, a genetic counselor can say, okay, you have a high predisposition to spike when you eat a banana. So you not necessarily need to eliminate a banana, but you need to then offset it with foods that normalize the glycemic spike and improve your diet. So that's a way to take these genetic tests, work with a counselor, and produce positive positive outcomes. Well, one of the outcomes, which I think is fascinating, is just by tweaking your diet. None of these, the 5 or 7 companies that I know of, are weight loss companies. But yet the really good ones, when people tweak their diet in the way we've been describing, will lose anywhere between 8 and 12 pounds in 3 months. That's without trying. That's simply tweaking and optimizing your diet. I think that's quite remarkable.
Wow, and probably a lot more sustainable in the long haul. Well, Ken, Ken, you are a fountain of fascinating information, and you're great. You do a great job of bridging from the deep science to making it accessible in the wider world. So, I think now is a great time to talk about your upcoming program, because we are so excited to be partnering with you. And really, this is one of the most holistic, balanced, scientific and spiritual kind of integrative approaches that we've ever offered through the Shift Network. So we're very excited to offer you real value with Ken's teachings in a course called Unlock Your Epigenetics. So we're very excited about this program, and you can find more detail at unlockyourepigenetics.com, unlockyourepigenetics.com. And it's going to be a 5-module, but 6 weeks program. And it's going to take you through some of these key foundational shifts that are so valuable for really understanding your epigenetic profile, your genetics, optimizing, tweaking your diet. And this actually involves, or the strong recommendation at least, is to do one of these biochemical assays as well. And then you're going to get information about that. So instead of having to do it just on your own, you're doing it in a group context, which the social value of that is super valuable as well. So Ken, I would love for you to share about what people are going to get in this program with you. Unlock Your Epigenetics, optimize your gene expression for vibrant health and longevity.
Right. Well, in the 6 weeks, the first week is, really looking at epigenetics. What it is, what does it mean, where did it come from, what does it do, what does it have to do with our health, how is it different than the kind of health prescriptives we have now about, this kind of exercise or that kind of exercise or this dietary guideline, et cetera, and how we begin to individualize that, how we begin to make it useful for ourselves. And then the second week is really looking at the 7 pathways. Each of those pathways is highly modifiable. And even without a genetic assay, there are things that we can do with our diet, with physical activity, with meditation practice that governs and moves those 7 pathways in an optimal direction. To me, that's kind of one of the most fascinating areas. The third week is then really the whole area of mind-body. An elaboration of the practices we just did very briefly now, which is what are the basic practices that allow us mentally to have a positive impact on our physiology, to really be like the hand on the tiller. I'm an avid sailor, and having a hand on the wheel with a very light touch is the way to go. And that's exactly what the mind-body system does. The interaction between the biology and our psyche is something that's critical for our health and well-being. And we'll literally learn practices that will enable us to do that. The fourth then is really looking in detail at diet, which has a profound impact, and really literally getting down to the fine-grained detail of exactly what are healthy fats versus unhealthy fats, what fruits and vegetables produce inflammation, which ones reduce inflammation. Inflammation is a critical factor in virtually all health, ranging from heart disease to Alzheimer's to arthritic disorders, irritable bowel syndrome. And how do we learn to regulate that and learn to live with a healthy level and not too much and not too little? And then we are going to, in the 5th week, we will look in detail at an assay. And one of the companies that I really like of the 7 that I mentioned is a company called Day 2. And they're a 10-year-old company out of Israel. By the way, just as a disclosure, I don't have any financial interest or stake in Day 2 or any of the other epigenetic assay companies. So this is purely looking at it objectively from the point of view of what's best, what's good science, and what's good for people. So we have an assay that's available from Day 2 to people that are in this course. And because I've said nice things about Day 2, I like the science. They're a very rigorous company out of Israel. They've been around for 10 years. out of the Weizmann Institute, which is one of the world's most eminent nutritional sciences labs in the world. And they're giving us 50% off. And so I think that's quite remarkable for people that engage in the course. But we'll then go through that in detail. I actually have one of the nutritionists from day two who will be a guest lecturer during that particular session. And we'll go through in great deal to exactly what it is in your profile that has the impact that's desirable based on the results from your assay. And then the last week is going to be really looking at some future technologies, some nanotechnology or ingestible technologies that will tell us even more detail, and also how we take and tweak everything we've learned in the previous sessions to extend life expectancy. And as I mentioned earlier, I think most of us assume that life expectancy is really a genetically governed variable, and it's not. How long we will live is entirely under our influence. And the opposite is true also. If you have parents that lived to be 90 and 100, does not mean you have a get home free or pass goal card. You can shorten your life expectancy as well by not undertaking some of the practices we're going to be talking about. So the last week will be to take everything we learned about enhancing the quality of our life and tweak it so that what we're looking at now is extending the quantity, literally how long we're going to live. And the most important thing for me is live in optimal health. So that's the quick 30,000 foot overview of the course.
Well, it's clear this is some of the most valuable information we can study and learn and really receive benefit from. It's like you're harvesting decades of research and making it super practical for how we actually optimize our lives now. So again, you can find all the detail about this program at unlockyourepigenetics.com. Epigenetics is EPIGENETICS, epigenetics, unlockyourepigenetics.com. So not only do you get the 6 weeks with Ken, you also get videos of every session, which includes live interactive time and Q&A time. There's audios and full transcripts as well. There's small group practice sessions and a lot of things that you get to do at home as well. So it's a very experiential class. We also have some extra bonuses that really enhance the value. There's a dialogue between Ken and Dr. Emmerin Mayer. There's one with Ken and Robert Roundtree. You want to say anything about either of those dialogues?
Emmerin Mayer is the chairman of gastroenterology at UCLA and has a book called The Mind-Gut Connection and has really pioneered the whole area of how our intestinal tract has an effect on our mental states as well as our overall health. So he's really quite brilliant, and we've done research together, and I always enjoy the dialogue with him. He's so knowledgeable. Dr. Robert Roundtree was winner of the Linus Pauling Award, which is a very prestigious award. He's a very eminent biomarker researcher, and in fact works with one of the 7 companies that I've mentioned, doing a lot of their basic biochemistry. But he's very knowledgeable. He's an excellent clinician, sees a lot of patients, and is very active in the Institute for Functional Medicine, which is the national association of predominantly physicians who work with nutrition to enhance health. So those are 2 really esteemed colleagues, and I actually am looking forward to the discussions with them.
Fantastic. We also have some other bonuses. There's one called Healing with the Mind, which is a new PDF article from Ken and Robert Roundtree, who we mentioned. There's a whole set of 3 PDF articles on epigenetic effect, which is a medley of articles on conventional and integrative medicine and mind matters. And probably the most significant value is a 50% discount on the assay test from day2.com. So really one of the premier outlets, worth the value of investing in the program just from that. So we've kept this incredibly accessible. For only $197, you're getting a lifetime worth of value, potentially lengthening your life, losing weight, getting healthier. All these things become a lot easier when you understand exactly how to work with your genes in an optimum way based on the latest science. And I should mention, we also have an extra bonus available today until midnight. We like to do this as an encouragement for you to go to the page and really make your decision today. So this is a bonus called "Is a Keto, Plant-Based, or Paleo Diet Right Through? right for you, how to wade through the hype to a food plan that's right for you. It's a video that Ken has done. Obviously, you heard a sneak preview of part of that earlier, that a lot of these diets are really, at best, maybe good for a small portion of the society and perhaps dangerous in the long haul. So it's really important to get to a diet that really is optimized for you. And Ken, you want to share anything about that special bonus that you do a whole video teaching just on that?
Well, you did a very good summary, and I think the basic message is that there is no right diet. There's no such thing as the right diet. I think all of our research has shown us very convincingly that no matter what is promised, no diet works for everyone. And there is a diet that works for you, and there are steps you can take to figure out what it is. And once you do, then you do optimize your health, you do optimize your longevity. And to me, that's the objective, not to follow some guidelines on high fat, low fat, whatever. It's kind of nonsense. But we'll sort through the details of that in the conversation.
Cool. Well, again, you can find all kinds of detail on this full program at unlockyourepigenetics.com, EPIGENETICS, unlockyourepigenetics.com. Course is going to begin on August 21st. It's going to run on Wednesdays at noon Pacific time. I'd like to say, even if you can't make the live time at Wednesdays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, you can still get the full value because you're getting the recordings. You can ask questions via Facebook group. You can get the transcripts, and most importantly, you can also get the information on the assays that you're going to get through the program too. So it really is the kind of investment in yourself and your health and your long-term happiness and well-being that will pay many dividends. So again, you can find details at unlockyourepigenetics.com, and you get the extra is keto, plant-based, or paleo diet right for you bonus when you sign up by midnight tonight. So Ken, this has been a great hour, really fascinating. I love, I studied originally human biology at Stanford and kind of went away to the human potential arena. And I feel like you're bridging so much of the kind of early roots I had in the sort of human biological sciences with the more spiritual consciousness work that I've gotten more into. And you're really a great synthesis between these worlds. So thank you for this time together, and thank you for all the research that you've done to get you to this point where you can synthesize it for the rest of us. Is there anything else on your heart you want to share about, for people who are considering joining you for the program?
Well, thank you. What you just said is very nice compliment. And I do think merging those two worlds is what I've tried to do. But part of my excitement about working, with you and the Shift Network is that when I see individual patients, there's practical information that I try to derive from all of these decades of science and research and clinical practice. And so what I really want, we're really hoping people get out of this, is practical, clear directions, knowledge about how to make the best decisions for their own health and longevity for themselves and their family and significant friends. If that can happen, and I think it can, then I would consider this to be a great success and would be a fun thing to be doing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your generous spirit and your wisdom. You're clearly a man who walks his talk, and you're radiantly happy and healthy yourself. I have no doubt you're going to be cooking at 100. So, so good. Thank you for all you've shared today, and I hope everyone has gotten as much value as I have. And you're warmly welcome to join Ken in the upcoming program on Unlock Your Epigenetics, which is at unlockyourepigenetics.com, and you get this special bonus on diet when you sign up by midnight. So again, you just go to the page at Unlock Your Epigenetics, read through the testimonials, and just make a decision today. It's to your advantage to do so when you have the most information about if this is the right next step for you. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Ken, for a wonderful hour. Bye now.
Thank you.